Jaya Gopi Janavallabha Girivaradhari Yashodanandana Vraja Janaranjana Yamuna Tira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare जय ओम विष्णुपाद परमहंस परजकाचार्य अष्टतो श्री श्रीमद एसी भक्तिवेदांत स्वामी शिल प्रभुपाद की जय ओम विष्णुपाद परमहंस परजकाचार्य अष्टतो श्री श्रीमद भक्ति सिद्धांत सरस्वती गोस्वामी शिल प्रभुपाद की गौर प्रेमानंदी। ओम नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय ओम नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय ओम नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय। Reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 3rd, Chapter 16, text number 34, 36. Last I checked, yes, 36. Okay. Text 36. Tayor asrayor adaya tejasayam yayor hivai akshiptam teja etarhi bhagvam stad vidhitsati tayor asrayor adaya Tejasayam yoyor hiva Akshiptam teja etarhi Bhagvam stad vidhitshati Tayor asrayor adya Tejasayam yayorhiva Akshiptam teja etarhi Bhagvam stad vidhitsati. Vaishnavis. Tayo of them. Asurayo of the two Asuras. Adaya today. Tejasa by the prowess. Yamyo of the twins. He certainly. Va of all of you, demigods. Akshiptam agitated. Teja power. Etarhi thus certainly. Bhagavan the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Tat that. Viditsati desires to do. Translation. It is the prowess of these twin asuras, demons, that has disturbed you, for it has minimized your power. There is no remedy within my power, however, for it is the Lord Himself who desires to do all this. This is Lord Brahma speaking. Purport. Although Hiranyakashipu and Hiranyaksha, formerly Jai and Vijay, became asuras, the demigods of this material world could not control them. And therefore Lord Brahma said that neither he nor all the demigods could counteract the disturbance they created. They came within the material world by the order of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and He alone could counteract such disturbances. In other words, although Jai and Vijay assumed the bodies of asuras, they remained more powerful than anyone, thus proving that the Supreme Personality of Godhead desired to fight because the fighting spirit is also within Him. He is the original in everything, but when He desires to fight, He must fight with a devotee. Therefore, by His desire only were Jai and Vijay cursed by the Kumaras. The Lord ordered the gatekeepers to go down to the material world to become His enemies, so that He could fight with them, and His fighting desires would be satisfied by the service of His personal devotees. Brahma showed the demigods that the situation created by the darkness for which they were disturbed was the desire of the Supreme Lord. He wanted to show that even though these two attendants were coming in the form of demons, they were very powerful, greater than the demigods, who could not control them. No one can surpass the acts of the Supreme Lord. The demigods were also advised not to counteract this incident, because it was ordered by the Lord. Similarly, anyone who is ordered by the Lord to perform some action in this material world, especially preaching His glories, cannot be counteracted by anyone. The will of the Lord is executed under all circumstances. Translation again. It is the prowess of these two asuras, demons, that has disturbed you, for it has minimized your power. There is no remedy within my power, however, for it is the Lord Himself who desires to do all this. Om Agyanatimirandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Garadhara Shivas Adi Gaur Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Feel really unqualified to be sitting here in the assembly of all the senior devotees. By their kindness and their enthusiasm, I'll try to speak something from the Bhagavatam based on my realizations. So what we are seeing here is the conclusion of this pastime. Remember that Vidura and Maitreya are having a conversation, and Vidura asked Maitreya about how is it that Hiranyaksha was killed by the Supreme Personality of Godhead in the form of boar, and that gave Maitreya the impetus to initiate this conversation. And so we see that through that questioning, this pastime is unfolded. So in the previous verses, we have read how the two gatekeepers were cursed by the 4 sons of Brahma, and because of their insensitivity to some degree towards the 4 Kumaras, they ended up being in the material world, in the womb of Diti. Of course, we know that, as Prabhupada expertly keeps us to the focus of what is happening, all this was arranged by the Supreme Personality of Godhead Himself. As we are seeing in this purport, that the Supreme Personality of Godhead also desires to fight, because He is the Supreme Enjoyer. So He has all the desires that we see in the material world. So this whole incident happened for the satisfaction of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. But one thing, when I was preparing for the talk, was the cursing of the 4 Kumaras to the 2 gatekeepers because of the Jai and Vijay not letting them inside the Vaikuntha. That result was because of the offending of the Brahmanas. And in previous verses we read that because of that offense, the luster and the beauty of Jai and Vijay diminished. So something to be careful of when we are dealing with the devotees, to be very sensitive in our interactions, whether someone is senior or junior or equal. We should be we don't know what their background is, what their level of spiritual advancement is. So we should be very careful in associating with devotees. And we should try our best to appreciate them and let them know what they have done for us, so that they can keep their enthusiasm of being in devotional service. As we all know that the society of devotees is like a hospital where there are different grades of devotees in different levels of understanding of how seriously they want to take Krishna consciousness. So we should not directly assume that if anyone is a devotee, then they are already perfect. But we should know that the devotees are they know they are on the path of perfection. And as Prabhupada would say that all the devotees in Krishna conscious movement are pure devotees. It is only a matter of time that they will come to that stage, as long as they remain in the fire of Krishna consciousness. Just like an example Prabhupada would give is of the mad elephant walking all over the garden and destroying the setup of the garden. So similarly, if we become insensitive or if we become complacent in our dealings with the devotees, then we can see that happening in our own spiritual life, and slowly and gradually we can see these doubts and questions starts to come in. Why do I have to chant? Why I can just be happy and peaceful without chanting? Won't make any difference in my life. And slowly we give up our reading and chanting, and we start to think, why do even I have to associate with the devotees? I have other people, and to the degree that other non-devotees are better than devotees, and so on and so forth. All these doubts starts to arise, all because of our insensitivity in our dealings with the devotees. So as we are seeing in this purport, Prabhupada mentions that this whole incident was approved by the Lord. Actually, this whole pastime was designed for the pleasure of the Supreme Personality of Godhead Himself. And again, as I was mentioning, that everything that we see in this world is coming from the spiritual world. So all the activities that are performed by living entities on the material platform are originally coming from the spiritual world. So this desire to fight is also something that is present in Krishna, because Krishna is the supreme enjoyer. He knows how to have fun and how to have good times. So he wanted to fight, so he decided, let my two devotees go down in the material world and prepare the scene, set the scene, so I can have a good time. Another point on this mark is that that we can engage in Krishna consciousness and use all our emotions in serving Krishna. And we are seeing how Jai and Vijay used their anger in serving Krishna. In one of the purports, Prabhupada writes, it's the mystic yoga system in anger. It's very, very interesting that it's not something that we have to, of course, the favorable way of engaging in devotional service is through love and favorable way of performing devotional activities, but even we can use our anger and all the emotions that we feel in Krishna's service. So one thing that I usually try to remember or try to execute, if I can remember, is whatever emotions I feel from day to day, whether it be anger or say hostility towards someone or any other kind of emotion, I try to remember from Srimad Bhagavatam any pastime which I can relate to and really step into their shoes and see how they were feeling when in that specific pastime. For example, if you feel separation from a friend or from a loved one, then you can step into the shoes of Queen Kunti when Krishna is about to depart in the first canto, and how she's feeling that separation of Krishna departing from Hastinapur. So Prabhupada writes that this is bhakti yoga in anger, what Jai and Vijay were about to display. Kamam, Krodham, Bhayam. So In text 31, Prabhupada mentions that Bhayam was fear, which was displayed by Kamsa, because he was always fearful of being killed by Krishna. And similarly, Kamam, lust, was displayed by the gopis of Vrindavan in their execution of devotional service. And similarly, we can also use despair in devotional service. Actually, the whole first chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, also titled as the Yoga of Despair, is Arjuna's dilemma to sort out his situation, and he is in anxiety and in distress, and he uses that opportunity to advance in Krishna consciousness by being placed in a good setting, by being in a good association. Of course, he's in the supreme association of Krishna. So something that we can meditate on is the day-to-day emotions that we feel. With good guidance, we can use those emotions in accelerating and advancing our Krishna consciousness. Another point that I read was this Jai and Vijay incident, or their display of devotional service, is also called Rodra Bhakti Rasa. That's also devotional service to Krishna, and Krishna enjoys that. Krishna likes to have exchanges where the devotees are angry with him, or they are feeling fearful of him, and so on and so forth. And Krishna knows how to handle us and how to handle our emotions. So just by our effort or our initiative to approach Krishna eventually sets us in the right path, no matter what emotions we bring onto the table or what desires we place in front of Krishna. Krishna is an expert physician that he can, with intelligence, fulfill our desires in such a way that we will become more Krishna consciousness. We become more Krishna conscious and will slowly give up our attachment in the material world. So one point that was very interesting that is given by the acharyas is there are 5 primary rasas and 7 secondary rasas. So what we see in this pastime is the display of the secondary rasa of anger by Jai and Vijay. So the acharyas makes the point that when these secondary rasas come in the forefront, the primary rasas become secondary, only temporarily, all for Krishna's enjoyment. So what we are seeing again in this purport is the distress of the demigods, and they take the same route of approaching their authority, who is Lord Brahma, and they are bewildered and distressed, and they don't know what really to do with this situation which they are facing. The universal atmosphere is becoming darker, and they can see all the inauspicious signs, and they have no clue what is going to happen and what is happening. And again, something that we all can relate to, at least in certain situations in our life where we don't really know where we are heading, what is ahead of us. But we can learn from all the personalities in Srimad Bhagavatam in terms of how we can appropriately respond to situations rather than react based upon our material mind and senses. So the demigods approach their authority, Lord Brahma, and inquired what is going to happen, what is happening. And Lord Brahma answers to them that this is all designed by the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And, we cannot do anything about it. All we have to do is be patient and tolerate the situation until the Supreme Lord himself comes down. So again, another point of being patient and tolerant, which at least in my educational background was never really taught to us. And even in our social, in our family or upbringing, something very obsolete. We don't really see these teachings of becoming or practicing and cultivating patience and tolerance and forgiveness and so on and so forth. So, and it's also very practical in our day-to-day situations where we do have to practice patience, and we have to tolerate certain situations, certain people, in order to go about in our devotional service. If we don't try to cultivate these qualities, then execution of devotional service will be very tough, because as Prabhupada says that if there are too many pots in the kitchen, automatically there will be a lot of noise and sound. So similarly in the society of devotees, although we are trying to serve the same goal, we have the same goal and same mission, but we all bring in our conditionings, our social and cultural backgrounds in the mix, and there will always be some disturbances or some tension. But we should learn to tolerate and again take guidance from the authority in order to resolve the situation. As it is said that bhakti is a guidance culture, so the more guidance we have, the more rich we are in our spiritual life. So demigods were advised not to counteract this situation, because it was all designed and ordered by the Supreme Lord. And similarly, Prabhupada is mentioning that anyone who is ordered by the Lord to perform some action in this material world, and specifically preaching his glories, cannot be counteracted by anyone. And the will of the Lord is executed under all circumstances. And we see that in Prabhupada's glorious life itself, that there were so many roadblocks and hurdles internally and externally, but because it was the will of the Lord, it was executed no matter what the circumstances was or no matter what the hurdle was. And it is still, if we look back and meditate on what Prabhupada did in 10 years, it's quite remarkable and extraordinary. So what we see in Srimad Bhagavatam is not something that is outdated or antiquated to be utilized by us in this 21st century modern society. No, it is something that we can always go back to when we are faced with situations in life, and even when things are good, to understand and to know what is the real goal of life. And we see how through Srimad Bhagavatam we can make our life perfect just by giving oral reception to the Srimad Bhagavatam. Something very simple but very profound. Again, a couple of days back we heard this science of bringing in progeny into the world, and Prabhupada mentioned it's a great science that can be studied carefully to understand how that can be brought about. One thing that stood out when Karma Prabhu was giving the class was in the purport, Prabhupada mentions that one's mind must be very sober and devotional. And Karma Prabhu mentions that the mind of individuals also has to be in mode of goodness at least, rather than be in mode of passion or ignorance when we are engaging in our affairs. Because usually we tend to go through situations based upon what instinctively we want to present, or we want to take action, but we forget that how we come under the influence of the modes. And so there is no other solution really to get out of the modes, or to help oneself go from lower mode to a higher mode. We don't really see any practice. Of course, in Bhagavad Gita, Krishna describes the activities of individuals in different modes, but in this day and age it is very hard for us to execute and implement those practices of performing austerities and fasting and meditating in isolation for certain amount of time. So the only solution we have to be sober and devotional, because it's not something that we can just artificially make up our mindset. It is something that has to be cultivated, and that cultivation can happen by practicing Krishna consciousness, by hearing, by reading, by chanting, Shravanam, Kirtanam, Vishnu Smaranam, Padasevanam, Archanam, Vandanam, Dasyam, Sakyam, Atma Nivedanam. So when we execute in all the limbs of devotional service, we create this atmosphere internally in our mind that we can come to that level and advance our consciousness to a higher level of mode of goodness, and to the supreme level of Krishna consciousness. Because what we see in today's society is utter chaos. Again, as I was mentioning, in educational system, it's not something that we are taught in day-to-day basis to be tolerant, to be devotional, to be sober. It's actually the opposite. We are taught how to be hostile towards other people, or how to stay intoxicated through different substances. So we can see how the society is designed and arranged in such a way that it is really tough to practice Krishna consciousness. And that's why we need a strong association. We need the society of devotees to uplift us and to keep us going forward in our spiritual life. Otherwise, it will become very tough to practice Krishna consciousness. No matter how many difficulties we see or how many problems we see within the society of devotees, we should always latch on to them, because our Krishna consciousness solely depends on the association of devotees. So I'll stop here and see if there are any questions. Yes, Prabhu.
Thank you, Prabhuji. So you were pointing out how there can be maybe a deficiency in ourselves, in our dealings, as far as sensitivity is concerned.
Mm-hmm.
And I was wondering if maybe you could elaborate a little bit of maybe an example, or maybe even telling us, helping us understand where that comes from, what the root cause of that insensitivity is, so we can better understand what we're actually dealing with and where it comes from, and a practical kind of maybe example even, if possible.
Well, the root cause of our insensitivity, not just with devotees but with anyone, is our impersonal, deep-rooted conditioning. And because of that impersonal conditioning, which, you know, if we are not really practicing Krishna consciousness, we wouldn't even know these things. That impersonal tendency comes out in different ways. One of the ways is being insensitive, not really seeing that we are dealing with a person and they have their whole background and setting that we have to deal with. We usually tend to just label people or box them into what we think individuals are like, and we forget that everyone is unique and everyone is a person, and we need to treat them in a very personal way. We cannot just give, use the same things for every individual in our dealings. It's like also in preaching and outreach, say if you go out on books, it's not that you can just keep using the same line to distribute books. You have to be at some point of time, in order to go more deeper in book distribution, you have to become more personal. You have to relate with the individual. You have to understand where they are coming from, and so on and so forth. And that really builds that connection. So similarly, that insensitivity that we showcase is coming from our impersonal conditioning. Actually, it is our impersonal behavior is a default in the material world. Just like forgetfulness of Krishna is the default in the material world, similarly, to lesser or greater degree, we all have impersonal tendencies. And it is for us to look within and realize that and understand where we are and how we showcase those impersonal tendencies. Because if we wouldn't know what we have to work, what issues we have to work with, then Krishna wouldn't be able to help us. We wouldn't be able to ask Krishna that please help me with this specific problem or situation, because we wouldn't know that this is an issue within me, and we would think I'm just good, I'm doing well. Thank you, Prabhu. Yes, Prabhu.
Hare Krishna. In trying to engage anger and lust, since we're all conditioned souls, we all have this rooted in our heart, we have these things. So we can understand that Hanuman and Arjuna, being pure devotees directly ordered by the Lord, they fully engage that. So I was wondering if you had some practical examples for someone who is a practitioner and wants to engage kama, lust, and anger, because they might be misconstructed. They might be imagining that they're doing service, but actually they're doing more damage. Any examples that you can think of?
The examples of how they can engage those tendencies. Well, as Prabhupada tells us in the Bhagavad Gita, that we can use our anger in protecting devotees. We can use that to protect the devotees. And of course it will be a situation that won't arise on a day-to-day basis, on an ordinary basis, but we have to channel our energies in the right way. We cannot just, let our senses go wild and just yes, I'm displaying my anger because I didn't get enough pizza for prasadam, so I'm just displaying my anger on everyone. So just like in Bhagavad Gita it is mentioned, we should be like tortoise and just bring our senses within. So similarly, we need to practice how we can release our emotions in the right way. And that's why we need guidance. If we don't have guidance, then we will just speculate and come up with ideas on how I should be behaving in the society of devotees. And similarly, kama, lust, can be engaged in begetting good children in Krishna consciousness. And of course, if you are not in that ashram, then you have to practice tolerance. And that's why tolerance and patience are unique characteristics. They are actually tools that we should always have with us under our sleeves, because not just within the society of devotees, but everywhere we see in our dealings with non-devotees and just in life in general, we have to practice tolerance and patience. Especially when we want things, we desire to have something, things don't come right away. So we have to practice tolerance and patience and stay up on executing our activities. But all these things can be resolved by having good guidance and being in good association. But if we are in a society of devotees but we don't take guidance from anyone, then what use is that association? So we should be proactive in reaching out and taking guidance from seniors. And especially in this historic place, New Dwarka, we have so much guidance in hand. We can just approach all these stalwart devotees and take guidance. So why should we learn by experience? Why can't we just learn by hearing from seniors? Yes, Maharaj.
First, I just want to say the last few points that you just made were all very beneficial and useful, and for all of us, because basically you put the burden on the devotee to make an effort in order to improve, rather than just take what comes and that's okay. So the point is this, is there is controlled anger and uncontrolled anger. Uncontrolled anger is explosive and it leads to conflict. It leads to fracas. It leads to disturbance. Controlled anger appears to be like real anger, but it's just a pretense, like a person on a stage. And he can do that because he's not identifying himself with his body. When you feel that your body can be offended or hurt or disturbed or upset, that's when you get really angry. But when you're not identifying yourself with your physical body and you see it as simply a shell which you're going to leave at some time in the future, then if a person says something not nice to you, or a person mocks you or looks down upon you, you don't take it seriously, because you know that he's criticizing something which we call the body, which will be dead in due course of time. Why get upset over something that will not even be here eventually? It has no value. So therefore, a person can pretend to be angry if it's necessary and it serves a useful function. But if it doesn't serve a useful function, then he may just observe patience, endurance, and quietude. It depends. But the main point is that A devotee who is not identifying himself with his physical body has control. Whereas a person who is identifying himself with his body, I am my body, I'm great, I'm wonderful, I'm glorious, I speak so well, or I do so many great things, I get great grades in school, I have a big diploma from my college. When a person starts thinking like that, then he's in trouble, because he's thinking he's big, great, grand, wonderful. And if somebody says something against that, he feels he's being in some way attacked. And when you feel you're attacked, you have to bluster back. Rhymed. So anyway, that's the main point. And I have seen Srila Prabhupada very time. He would appear to be angry. Somebody said that, well, Srila Prabhupada said such and such. And then Prabhupada disagreed. He said, I have never said that. Where did you hear that I said that? And he was angry. He said, don't say I said things that I didn't say. And then the next second, it was as if he was not the slightest bit angry. But he wanted to teach the devotee not to just say things, but to say things that were true, that would be useful or beneficial. And in so doing, the students, the devotees, would benefit. But if you say false things, he was saying, you're giving them a wrong impression of what I am. That's number one. And number two, you're making others follow in the same wrong manner. So everybody will be saying wrong things. So better say the things that truly, and not only say what Prabhupada said, but understand them. If you don't understand them and you just give your own understanding, that's not a good idea. But his understanding comes from a sublime, very lofty, high position of knowledge. And therefore, when we take that with us and share that with others, others get the same benefit.
Thank you, Maharaj.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll stop here. Srimad Bhagavatam ki, Srila Prabhupada ki.
Oh, thanks.